Just have a couple more people trickling in. 2 more minutes.
Hey, how do the office hours normally go? Do you like lecture a bit, or do people just ask questions?
So yeah, good question. So usually I include in the meeting invite a form that you can fill out to just submit your question, and that's what all these initial slides are populated with. But once we're
Ah,
through with
okay.
that, you know, definitely open mic for anyone who wants to share or bring up anything. At the same time, right, as we go through these questions, I'm sure several follow-up questions come up. So,
Yeah, sure.
it's in future times we will have more like a uh, presentation, if you will, or at least like a town hall style, where the core semantic kernel team will present. We might have some guest speakers, things like that, um, and that will be more like a Q&A style fashion after the presentation. But for purely office hours, it's more just organic, free flowing. We try to seed some initial content, but definitely just ask things in the chat too. Uh, happy
Okay,
to collect those, and then we'll get to them when we can.
sounds good. Thank you.
All right, 11:05 Pacific, so we can get started. All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the second edition of the Semantic Kernel Community Office Hours. I'm joined here with several colleagues from the Semantic Kernel team. So everyone just, I guess, raise your hand if you are from SK. We have Craig, we have Devis, we have Tao, and I think that's it. But yes, so as mentioned, right, this space is really for you all, for us to hear from what your experiences are, either using the semantic kernel, and building apps or things on top of that. So you want to certainly hear the feedback, incorporate it, and make sure that we make the semantic kernel as so. With that, I don't know, Craig or Devis, do you want to say a few words, or should we just go ahead and get started?
Well, hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Davis Ducato. I'm the product architect, work with the core team. Happy to meet people, customers or new makers, developers. I'm a very open source person, people passionate about working with people in the open. Love feedback. I love finding bugs. Just found one. I'm working through one during this meeting.
Very good, very good. One thing I want to call out is we are very close to 10,000 stars. So if you haven't already, please, give our repo a star, send it to your friends, help us get over that at least milestone. And for those may just be joining for the first time, yeah, the semantic kernel started in the open source around March. We at within the office of the CTO at Microsoft, we were working on this project for about a year, and we decided to take our learnings and to share them with the community, and to also incorporate the learnings that you all are finding, and to build this project together. So it's definitely a journey. We're all very early on in AI, large language models, and all that, but excited to have you all with us. Okay, without further ado, we can go ahead and start getting into some questions. As mentioned, right, definitely put in the chat any questions or things that come up. Then I and the other members of the SK team can look and answer them as we go on. So we'll start off with Anthony. So Anthony asks, when creating native skills, it's unclear what the standard for the return type should be. While SK primarily operates on strings, there's quite a few places, Copilot Chat App, where the skills return the SK context itself. Can we get some clarity on the pros, cons of each return type? So Anthony, if you're on the call, If this question has everything, or if you want to add some more color, please do.
Yeah, this was my question. I think we actually reviewed this last week.
Oh, okay.
I could be incorrect, but yeah, I know we hashed it out for a couple minutes.
Okay.
We
I think
have
we came to
Davis here this week. I would love Davis to maybe answer if he's okay.
Of course. Yeah, that's my fault. I introduced the context object, but it's actually a feature. So the way the kernel is designed is very text driven, as like the Unix philosophy where text is your main protocol, text in, text out. So the initial version of the kernel was just strings in and strings out. However, we pretty soon saw that that wasn't enough. And so we introduced this concept of context where you can have, it has two purposes. One purpose of the context is giving you a way to reach out into helpers like the memory helper and the, what else? Other skills, for example, the skill registry. So you can, from your scale, you can reach out and call other skills. However, there is also variables, so you can store more than one input text. You can have a dictionary of strings. So we could have, so the initial version was string and string. Then we said, okay, we can allow also context and context, but we wanted to be, try to be flexible. And there are, you can have string in and context out, context in and string out. And that is for flexibility purpose. Now that flexibility may probably generate some confusion, like, okay, which one should I use? And I would suggest, if you're okay with it, always use the context. So context in, context out, that's probably the easiest option. However, if you're working with legacy code where you can't do that, you have to receive a string or you have to return a string only, you can do that too. So it's up to you and your design, whether you want to use one or the other. Personally, I like simplicity. So when I can, I like having just a string in and a string out. However, often I need to reach out to the memory or call other skills. So I like receiving an input, a context. And you can have a first parameter, which is the input string, and a second parameter, which is the context. You can also just use the context because the context also contains the input. I understand it's a little bit confusing, and we're doing some work to remove these so that you can design the functions the way you like typical native code. Like, this is my function, it has an input, it has an output, it really depends on my business. I don't want the kernel to tell me. But if you really want to make a consistent choice throughout your code, particularly if you're writing a new app, just use the context in and context out. And I would suggest in that case, make sure you understand how the context work. So in the context, you have a dictionary of strings, and one particular string is called input, is a hard-coded name. You can access that input two ways. You can do context.input, or you can do context.variables input. It is the same value by design. So there is this convention that the input key is also the default string. I hope that helps. I think we should maybe also document this and try to provide some guidance. But I hope that it helps having a context object. We're also trying to simplify it, so eventually you might not have to make that decision. You might not even have to think about it.
Yeah, that's perfect. That completely answers my question. And I think it's also beneficial to, especially when designing, these custom functions, not having to have multiple arguments, just throw the SK context in there and reuse that for everything. No, thank you.
Yeah, I think we recently merged a pull request that allows to have more than two parameters, like any number of parameters. And so we're moving in that direction where you don't have to write the code specifically for the kernel. Yeah, you can just write it the way you like. There is always going to be the question, what if I have to pass a complex object into my functions? Like you want to pass, like, let's say, a list of dictionaries or a nested complex class. for that scenario, you have multiple options. You can use singleton and static code, which is ugly, or you can serialize your data into JSON and then deserialize it back into your function. So we will do some work to make it easier. But for now, I would try to always flatten out your functions to deal with text. Like even if you're working with images, try to reduce the image down to text, for example, with GPT-4, any other model, and then deal with only the description of the image rather than passing the image into your functions. That would simplify the workflow, because at that point you can also leverage the planner. The planner is designed to work with strings. If your functions are expecting an input an object, it will become harder for the planner to work, and you might end up in a corner where you can use only GPT-4, where sometimes you might want to use 3.5 turbo. That's all from me.
No, Alex, you're on mute.
Very good, very good, very comprehensive. All right, we have quite a few, so I'm just gonna keep going. So Mike asks, new functionalities and integration examples. If Mike is on the call, if there's certain things that you want to particularly see, let us know. But I'm guessing this is just about like what are the latest features from last week to this week. I'm trying to think anything off the top of my mind. I don't know, Craig or Devis, or something particularly want to call out.
Yeah, I'm being on vacation for a week, so unfortunately I cannot help with this one.
Yeah,
But I know that we're making a lot of progress on the Python side to bring up new features. We're adding more memory vector DBs, supporting more of them. For example, Pinecone, Weaviate, and others. So the goal is to support any vector DB. I'm also having I have people reaching out personally like, oh, I'm working on a new vector DB. Can we add it to the kernel? Like, yeah, please. If you're working on something like that, reach out and we will help in making your product more visible. And other things, at that PR, they mentioned about supporting multiple parameters in the functions in the .NET side. I think we have to do that in the Python yet. And I don't know, I can't think about anything else in particular. I think the best source is always looking at the pull request, what has been merged. And we try to release every week. There was an exception with the build conference because we didn't want to break the code during demos that we were running with clients.
Yeah, from my side, one exciting thing that's happening and will hopefully get merged in soon is our third language that we will be supporting is Java. So I'm sure there's already been several discussions on Discord already around it. So if you're a Java user, definitely join that conversation and check out what's currently there. I don't know if anyone on the call is representing Java or Java user, but yeah, that's something to keep an eye on. And obviously, there's more updates happening on the Copilot chat app, which for our work, the Semantic Kernel team core work, this is where probably a lot of the effort will be to add more and more features to. So if there are certain things that you want to see, please let us know. But this app is effectively like our reference sample for you all to say like, hey, if I want to build my own chatbot, like with the Semantic Kernel, how would that look? So it's an end-to-end app, and you could deploy it yourself. You could reskin it if you want, completely free, up to you.
Yeah, and Alex, when I want to find out what new stuff's coming in, I like to go to the samples folder, then .NET, then kernel syntax examples, being a .NET dev myself. It's a growing list of things. Yeah, so go .NET, kernel syntax examples, and they're just sequentially numbered. So I look at whatever the highest number is. Those are things that I then learn, okay, this has changed, or this is new. This is something that I can go and learn.
Yeah, great point. I pasted the link in the chat. This is a great resource from this .NET side. I think we should have this on the Python side too. This is just a good way to just enumerate the newest features coming out. All right, next question. So Richard actually has several, so I'll just start reading them off. So notice that the Copilot chat sample uses iText completion rather than iChat completion. Are you aware of any differences in capability that this introduces? It strikes me that with this approach, the system role is not explicitly used when hitting the API, and you therefore have to really carefully bake those guardrails into the prompt, rather than having system-specific system role messages in the chat completion API.
Yeah,
Want to know this rationale.
I can say like historically why it happened, and then maybe Davis can comment on the benefits or disadvantages. So originally we had these text completion models, Text DaVinci 003, 002, all the older ones. Then we had GPT-3.5 Turbo, which was only chat completion, and we had GPT-4, which was only chat completion. Created a bit of a fork in the road. All of our samples originally were doing text completion. Even the earlier samples that we're doing against an earlier version of GPT-4 was also text completion. And then when things shipped, they were chat completion. So in order to, in our minds, simplify things for everybody in the repository, we decided to make it possible for the chat completion services to also support text completion skills. Am I going in the right direction? I don't know. I think I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like historically, and then maybe Davis, you want to comment about, should we change that for Copilot chat and other samples?
Yeah, no, you're right on the historic part. I was reading the question twice. I think the question might be about the specificity of the user scenario where there's actually a chat going on. So we started with this idea of semantic functions that only need text completion, and but you don't have the text completion API on 3.5 Turbo and GPT-4. So we simulate the text completion on those models. So if you look at the client talking to GPT-4, you will see that it has both interfaces, text completion and chat completion. So when you talk to GPT-4, you can choose which one. So if you're working with a function, you want to complete the text, the code underlying will use the chat completion to simulate the text completion. However, in Copilot chat, the actual scenario is a chat. So we're leveraging the API and to avoid that translation back and forth between chat and text, because it is done automatically by the endpoint. So I think that in that Copilot chat example, the system role is empty. I'm not sure if it is customizable, but we're basically, rather than reinventing the chat protocol over the text completion protocol, we're just going straight directly to the chat completion endpoint because the user interface is a chat. I don't think it introduces any artifacts. It should actually be better, fewer hallucinations when you use the chat protocol. And whether you want to use one or the other, it really depends on the scenario. So if you're writing, you might use both. If you're writing a function where you're asking to summarize, and you want to present the summary into a chat, you might use text completion to generate the summary, and then the chat completion to refine the summary and present it as a message to the user. I think it is a combination of both. It depends on the user interface that you're building. And other guardrails, I don't think you need anything specific when you use chat completion because the model is designed for the chat. However, if you're not working on a chat, you might get back something odd, like the bot replying as a chat message, even if what you want to display is not supposed to be a chat message. In that case, is where you would use a system role to say, okay, this is not a chat. I just need some work done, and this is the work to do, and you ignore everything else. So I think it really depends. I find it confusing, to be honest, that you have to make a choice I would prefer everything to be text completion with maybe a flag. But yeah, you have to deal with that. It looks like OpenAI and Azure and indirectly are both going in that direction for a while. I think over time it will change because it's not always a chat. Users might want to work on a multi-user chat or might want to work on a whiteboard. So, and I hope they're not going to create a whiteboard API or anything else. I prefer the old style of text in, text out. You can build on top of that. That would be my recommendation.
Richard, I see you're on the call. Is that good for you?
Yeah,
on this point?
I guess I remembered reading something somewhere, and I struggled to find it since, obviously, that the system role within the context of hitting that Azure or OpenAI API had some specific behaviors. So stuff you put in the system role could not be overridden, that there were some specific behaviors around that. And because we're not using it, I just want to make sure we weren't sort of losing out on that guardrails aspect, because we're sending everything as a single chat message. At least in the Copilot chat example, that we weren't missing out on some different behaviors, if you like, in the API by carving up your prompt into system role and a bunch of messages rather than just putting one prompt as one lump in each interaction. Yeah, I think I'll have to dig a bit deeper on the system role impact.
When you call the chat endpoint, what happens on the other side is you're sending a list of messages. They flatten that list down to a text. And internally, they do a text completion anyway. There are some specific tokens that they inject between each message. And yeah, it is supposed to help with prompt injection so that you could say in the system message, you are a useful assistant working on the health care. You're not going to provide any legal assistance, even if the user asks. So in theory, the user shouldn't be able to override that, but don't take that as 100% working solution against prompt injection. Even if it looks like a system message, whatever the user input is, there is always going to be a chance they can override the system message or the system role. So it is more of like I would suggest look at the system role or the system message as a way to provide context outside of what the user and the bot are talking to each other, rather than instructions. So context is just a way to direct the model into a particular direction, while guardrails feels like, oh, that's is going to protect me, and I wouldn't consider that as a protection.
Okay, that's really useful insight, and particularly the flattening idea that the other side of the fence, they're flattening the chat messages into a single blob. That's great. Thanks for that.
All right. Richard actually asked several questions, so let's see if we can get through these ones. We're looking to create a summarization skill that can handle very large document content. So entail breaking up the document into sections and combining/refining the summary. Are there any patterns in SK that would help with implementing this chunking capability? So the answer is yes. And I see Lee posted several of these links. Just open these, and I'll paste them in the chat too, so you all can have them. But the short answer is yes, chunking is a real what do you want to call it? It's a common pattern that will happen as you use this semantic kernel and you want to do it over real data. Not every document will fit into memory. So as such, there's a bunch of different chunking strategies you can use. We have a few inside the kernel, both on the C# and Python side. But think of it as, right, you're trying to chunk and then ultimately likely create an embedding of that chunk. So whatever strategy you use, right, you want whatever the embedding that is going to contain that chunk to include the necessary information that you want, right? So that's what I would say. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on this some more.
Yeah, I think we would provide more examples in the coming weeks. We're working a lot on memory, and that memory requires this ability to split big documents into smaller ones. And you will see more strategies coming along. For example, if you look at the current code, we take the document and we cut in precise places. There are other strategies where whenever you cut, you keep a bit of the previous block in order to keep context flowing through block to block. And that is one of them. There are other strategies. For example, if you're dealing with documents that contain code and text, you can translate the code to a syntax tree and replace the code with a syntax tree and summarize that. You get the model to understand better what the code is doing, rather than expecting the code to understand Fortran and Pascal if you have all documentation, for example. And other things, of course, you might have to do this recursively. For example, I did try to summarize War and Peace, which is, I don't know how, a million or I don't know, 20 million tokens. It took about an hour because I was splitting and summarizing. And you can go back for a huge document back to a sentence if you like. So one thing I could suggest is when you summarize, try to define also the size that you want to reach. Like you can say, I want to summarize down to 10%, or I want to summarize down to 200 tokens, and think about that problem recursively so that you don't have to think about, oh, I'm going to make one API call per chunk, but I might have to do it multiple times over and over. If you do that, you will notice that with different approaches, you get different quality of the output. You might see some hallucinations. If you, for example, if you have an appendix, if you have a glossary, if you have a table of content, and they happen to be summarized, depending on how you chunk, you might get different results. So hopefully we will help, but I would invite experimenting with that area because it's very fascinating seeing, because you have to think about how humans do that. Like, how do we summarize? And we have a very small window of attention. And so we try to replicate that algorithm back to Indian language model. And there are many, many approaches.
Very good. All right. So there's questions about action planner, sequential planner. Also,
I added it in the chat. As of yesterday, the answer is yes. The sequential planner is possible to use in the Copilot chat sample.
Oh, excellent.
So I linked to the PR. Have a look at that. I actually have not used it, given it just came in yesterday. But as of yesterday, yes, that is now possible.
yeah, please let us know how this works. All right,
Great stuff.
Richard, just coming in with all the questions. All right, Copilot sample uses specific completion to convert the user ask into user intent. This is then used to drive the rest of the chat functionality. Can you give us any insight to thinking here? Is this primary mechanism to prevent the user from rewriting previous instructions, or is there another important rationale that we should be aware of? Are we asking as this effectively doubles the token usage for a given prompt?
Yeah, on this one, I believe what you're referring to is, so when an ask comes in, there needs to be a determination made whether it's just a chat message, just asking the model to then give a response, or if it's something that requires planning. And I believe, just rereading the question, that is the reason that's there. I don't think we're preventing the user from rewriting the instructions. I can check with the team on this one.
You're right, Craig. You're right, Craig. It's all about understanding what the user is looking for. There is nothing else going on there. It's not about prompt injection. You're right.
Yeah, so if you wanted to reduce the usage, I guess you could disable planning, which would disable plugin support in Copilot chat, also a bunch of other things. So you just have a vanilla conversation with the model at that point.
Okay, so the idea is to convert the user's ask into something else that's more specific. I mean, the user intent prompt looks like it's trying to, I don't know, rationalize the user's prompt in a specific way to make it, I guess, more targeted or more expressive of their intent. I guess I just had trouble getting my head around why we need to do that.
You could combine. So this is the flow chart, right? The bot receives a message, and now you have to decide what to do about it. Can you reply to the user message? Do you have the information to reply? Or is the user asking to execute an action, and then you need to present a plan in order to execute the action? So you can do the if as the first intent detection prompt, and then you switch down to RAG pattern to provide an answer, like fetch the relevant information, create the answer, or call the planner, create a planner, and show the planner to the user. So currently we do that flow, so we have 2 requests. You could combine that. Basically, you would have to combine the RAG pattern with the planner to do all at once, like take the user message and ask the model to decide whether to use relevant information to answer or to use the planner to create a plan. We don't do that. Like, we don't have this big prompt that does both. We split it in 2 requests. Now, consider that you pay per token, you don't pay per request. So you might have twice the latency, but the cost should be the same or maybe less because you don't have to pass the relevant information when you're trying to use the planner. So from a dollar cost perspective, you do intent detection first, you use few tokens to make a decision, and then you call either the planner or the RAG to answer. That should be less expensive than doing all at once.
Okay,
I see.
but
How
we do
is
the
here?
intent extraction before everything else, right? We just do that as a kind of precursor to all the other bits we do. Doesn't seem to alter the flow. It just turns the prompt into an intent.
Yeah, I see Tao Tao did work on that, so maybe he can provide more insights.
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. I think from another point of view is because there is a token limit, right? We cannot always include all the chat history inside the prompt. So what the user intent does is to summarize the chat history into a more concise description of the from the latest chat message up to, the token limits to, to get a more concise description of what the user wants. So that's the primary purpose of the user intent. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, it does look like we include the chat history verbatim in the request for the intent, and we then include it again with the intent subsequently. So that was really the
right. So
yeah.
the chat history. So if we don't have enough token left in the prompt, we won't include the chat history. So as the chat goes on, like you have been talking to the bot for like a couple of weeks, then you have more memories saved in your data storage, or you have more documents, right? That would take up the token space. And then in that case, we won't put any more chat. We won't put any chat history inside the prompt.
Okay, so up to the
If
token
that makes
limit,
sense.
we're including the chat history verbatim twice, right? Once to get the user intent, and then subsequently along with the user intent. I guess I was just trying to understand the rationale for bothering converting the user's raw prompt into a user intent.
Sorry, you're saying that we're including the history twice? I don't think we're.
It looks that way to me. I've added some sort of additional logging of what the actual completions look like, and it looks like we do it once for the get intent, and then we include it again when we actually do the completion for the subsequent request.
Yes. So the final prompt you see, because we still have space for the chat history. So in cases where you have many memories, and then for each prompt, it will try to draw in as many memories as possible that's related to your intent. And then up to a point there isn't any token left for the prompt to fill in, then we won't include any chat history. I
Right.
think it's just a rare case that we're hitting the token limits right now, because I don't think anyone has been talking to the bot for long enough. So
Yeah.
That's why we first try to summarize the chat history first, because we were not always including a chat history in the bottom.
Okay. Yeah. So up to the token limit, we are making 2 requests, including the entire chat history. That was my point, really. So that the user intent becomes quite expensive, and just want to understand what the rationale of the user intent specifically was. But yeah, I kind of get the gist.
Yeah, maybe we could do some optimization. We don't include the entire chat history, maybe just the past 10 messages to get the user intent. Maybe that's something we can do. Or maybe, yeah. But hopefully I answered your question.
Cool, thank you.
Is it okay if I just
Yeah, go
comment?
ahead.
Yeah, so it's kind of tied into my question later, but I think the other thing to think about is the planner can get confused if you pass it some history. So the intent and summarizing function there is really helpful to get it to basically just function much better. If that helps understand that.
Yeah, so I guess you're saying that their latest prompt isn't necessarily their intent. You need to come up with the intent from the history plus the prompt in order to give it a good cue. Okay, that makes sense.
And then for the chat response, they also need to see the full explicit history. So that's why it's kind of being used twice.
Yeah, that's useful. Thank you.
Yeah,
Right,
I think
Richard. Okay,
sorry, one final comment. I think the prompt engineering part of Copilot Chat is always work in progress. So we are happy to we welcome any suggestions. That's it. Go ahead, Hikes.
Well, yeah, I just skimmed through this. I believe actually this is the same conversation, Richard. I don't know if there's anything specific that you wanted to call out here.
This was really again, this is us real world users that have to pay for our tokens and being a bit stingy about what we consume and what we don't, and thinking around the memories in particular, the long-term and short-term memories that the Copilot Chat app sort of creates. So at the end of every request, we go through and do a completion to get the memories, and do that twice. That's two additional quite large completions if you've got a significant sort of chat history. So again, I'm kind of trying to tune into the rationale in which the long and short term memories are really adding to the experience, and the capability of the chat. And what are we getting for those 2 extra completions to build and maintain those long and short term memories on each request?
Yeah, for sure. I would say it also certainly depends on the scenario of the chat that you're using, right? If you need something that can pull from a conversation from last week or however far back, then yeah, like it will get expensive to sort of concatenate all that history. But if you're just doing something very like a simple chat, like maybe you don't need to do all this. Maybe you don't have to use memories as much. So
okay.
Yeah, it's optional, so I guess you don't have to do that. Like you can play with how little memory or history you need to pass your chat if you want to optimize costs.
Yeah, I think the strength and probably the problem with the Copilot sample is it's the one everyone's going to be jumping on.
Yeah.
Just trying to understand how many of these pieces that there are, and because there's no current sort of diagnostic logging about how many tokens you're using, we're not aware that you're making 4 times the sort of tokens you might expect to be using. So just trying to understand which bits are the absolute perfect chat scenario, and which ones are part of that core experiences is where we're coming from.
This is good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, moving on to Tommy. He is asking about Python. How do we parse responses from model output and retry when the models fail to respond in an expected way? For example, model should respond with an answer in a JSON block, but instead writes a narrative answer. Is there a pattern for mapping prompts to semantic functions for specific models? Not all prompts should work the same way. So I think this kind of goes into the subject of like guardrails, right? Especially if you want some sort of structured output, like a well-formatted JSON, then you do want to specify that in your skill as much as possible. Like literally say, create me a well-formatted JSON, and even show an example of what that looks like. I think that helps guide the model to more reliably produce this. But it is a very real thing of like post-model kind of, what do you call it, like validation that the response is good. So I know there are several projects. I think we talked about this last week. I forget, but there are projects out there that we're keeping an eye on that also like, yeah, help in this area. Tommy, I don't know if you're on call, but
yeah, I am. Sorry, thank you. That was very helpful. Actually, I think you managed to merge two questions into one there. The second part, that is there a pattern for mapping prompts to semantic functions? That was the other question. I mean, I just noticed, you know, as you were saying, steering these models is quite tricky, and some prompts work very well with a specific model and others don't, right? So I was wondering if there's some sort of preferred method to associate a prompt with a semantic function for a model.
Okay, yes. So this is where you can have multiple instances of a kernel, right? And when you instantiate a kernel, you choose which model to, I guess, register it. So you can use 3.5 Turbo, you can use GPT-4, Text DaVinci 003. Soon we'll support like all different models as well. Today you could even do like Hugging Face models if you wanted, which has some advantages, right? You can run it locally and not have to incur API costs. I don't know if we specifically have guidance other than if you want something like Planner to work, you want to probably use GPT-4, just because you want the most powerful model to do the heavy lifting and the reasoning side. But there certainly are several scenarios where a cheaper, simpler model could work. Okay, so I see that Tommy also asked other question. So how do we capture the outputs and the stages of an execution? I think LangChain has a callback class for this. Is there a similar concept? Use case to feed the front end with live status of what is happening in their pipeline. Okay, I think this is a different question. So this one piece, Davis, Craig, or do you want to?
Yeah, I don't think we have anything ready. We've been talking about this for a while, maybe on the Python side, but also for different goals, also in the C# side. Right now, I don't think we have a good answer for this, and it was more about changing the code and doing the work on top of the kernel, if it is possible. But if the planner is going through multiple steps, you might have to customize the way the planner steps through and have your own callbacks. We were planning to do something here to make it more transparent. Also, I see at the end of the question here, giving up, which is another feature we want to add. For example, you might want to have 3 plans, not just one. And you want to say stop us, and you want to run all of them in parallel. As soon as one of those plans is done, stop the others. So there are multiple scenarios that we want to support, but right now I don't think we have anything great that can help. It's typically is for sure an ask that has been raised multiple times.
Thank you.
Like one idea here, for example, that came up was I wanna run the planner in the background in an infinite loop and give it a budget. Like the budget could be in terms of tokens to spend or money to spend. And you want to define that and you want to see the progress. So we have a lot of those scenarios in mind. And also when you start talking about agents, you want to see what the agent is doing. And it's definitely a feature that will come up pretty soon in the next 2-3 months, I suppose. And we will have samples. I don't know if the Copilot chat is the best place to do that sample. It might be in the form of a console app that will show you the pattern and then you can build on that. But it might also come out in the, if we deploy agents inside of Copilot chat, you might see that too in there, like the agent is 50% done, the agent is doing this, and that might be useful too.
All right. Tommy also had this other question. How do we summarize or condense results of complex large planner plugins? Context given to the model to answer fits within the token limits. I see. So this is like, okay, if a planner uses Azure Cognitive Search, answer a question, stream of documents hit token limits only as a partial answer. So Lee points this out as an example of using a text chunker. So I know this, I think Tommy prefaced this saying this is on the Python side. So but yeah, I think it kind of is similar to the conversation we had earlier, that not just in a chat scenario, but certainly a planner should call on skills, native and semantic, that help condense the prompt or the input that you're putting into these models, so that it fits within a token limit. So you can imagine, just thinking out loud, like you can create a skill that says, like, hey, as Devis mentioned, you have a budget of 1,000 tokens, right? Only create an output that fits within that budget. So you can, and then bring that skill into the planner, and it can negotiate how to use that.
I think it would be great having a sample that does exactly this. This seems a very great example of, I have a real scenario, like I have a lot of information, I'm using the planner, I have only 4,000 tokens, I'm dealing with big documents. Can you show me how to make it work? I think this would be nice.
Thank you for the
All right.
responses. Even the C# example is very helpful too. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, we have Anthony back. So he asks, making max tokens optional, whether it be through a new completion request or by making the existing property nullable.
I think it is optional, isn't it?
I thought I was on the latest NuGet package version. Maybe I'm not.
Should we just pull it up? I don't know where the code is. How about
At least,
okay.
yeah, I was just running through at least the methods. It defaults to 256 if I'm invoking a function. I think the main request here is, yeah, we clearly can't make it knowable for everything because there's some models that require that max tokens, but especially with OpenAI releasing the chat models, being able to have the API figure out how much it can give back would be way better in my opinion than, because right now, I mean, as I'm passing all these different prompts and things around, calculating the tokens, I'm kind of just like subtracting 100 randomly just so I don't accidentally go over and hit an API error. Having it do it would be extremely beneficial in my mind.
Totally agree. Yeah. I think maybe some APIs are, you have to pass it, but yeah, if you don't have to, it should be optional. I've seen, for example, in the Azure, what's it called? Azure OpenAI Studio, they used to have, they used to show tokens, max tokens. Now they changed the user interface to remaining tokens. Like they know which model you're using. They don't ask you to enter how many tokens you want. They just show you how many tokens you're using. Because at the end of the day, you want an answer. You don't know if that answer is long or short. And you just want the model to stop as soon as it is done. So I'm totally agree. We should make it optional if it is possible. It looks like a good feature to have, or a bug to fix.
Yeah, I especially find this as a bottleneck trying to make a semantic skill, because of, you know, defaulting to 256. Right now I have to make everything in native just to count the tokens, see how much is left. So great. That might be something I'd pick up and try working on and throw a PR
Yeah,
in
please. Yeah, please send a PR. We can work on this together. And if you want to do it on one language or the other, or both, is great. And we can always fill in if we see something else that we can add.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Nayana asks, I want info on post-call parameters after the deployment is done. So this is specifically about deploying to Azure. Craig, do you?
Post-call parameters. What does that mean?
Maybe how to call the semantic functions or the functions in the cloud.
Yeah, so this version might be the one that just has the /invoke endpoint on it. I'm just looking at the docs. Doesn't look like they included. Add a call there. Okay, verifying. Okay, we have probe. Yeah, so the typical pattern, let me grab this from the code. See if it's still got it in there.
Is there a Swagger doc that one can open?
I'm not sure if we published a Swagger for this particular sample, but it didn't look like anything was included on the Learn side. We should check with Matthew. I think Matthew said last week that you had done a bit of a revision to the docs. So let me grab. I'll just grab the without a Copilot chat, but I will grab what I think this is referring to. It's basically a /invoke, name of the skill, or maybe /invoke skill name of skill, function, name of function. It's that general pattern. But let me get the exact one. I'll paste it in the chat. And Alex, if you want to move on to the next question, we can. Or if the person that asked the question wants to clarify, feel free to jump in.
I don't see Nayana on the call, so we can go to the next one.
Okay.
All right, so Adelma asks, being able to use a planner in a chat scenario where it can maintain context on the chat conversation. Notice when create a planner, you can pass a goal to it, meaning it will only maintain context of that one question. I'd like to see how the planner can be used in a way that it uses the chat history to obtain all context variables needed, even if they are not all provided in one singular question. There's a question to the SK team. In the Copilot chat sample, do we only run planner on just one ask as opposed to the entire chat conversation?
I think it is a design question. Currently, planners are designed to get all the context from the goal. And we usually say, if the planner is not doing what you ask, provide more information and put that information in the goal. In this case, that extra information is in the chat history. So the current direction is including the goal, also the chat history. And so it's a long string with the entire history and the final ask, the goal at the end. I think that's the current way to do it. But I haven't tried that scenario where the chat history contains data that the planner should use. So I think it's something that we should investigate a little bit to make sure it works. Otherwise, we might have to change a little bit the design to say that this is the goal and this is the extra information I want to include for the planner. So, and tell the planner to use both those values, use the goal to understand what to achieve and use the other string, that's text, to know which information it is already available. But
yeah,
there is a context. There might be a context parameter that you pass to the planner. I don't remember exactly. Maybe you can include the chat history in that context too. I don't remember.
We passes the intent in the Copilot. That was around that previous question. So we get the intent thing that summarizes the chat history plus the prompt to derive an intent, and that's what we pass to the planner in the Copilot chat sample.
Okay,
Yeah.
hi. So I was sorry, I was the one that asked the question. So that's actually interesting. I'm not too familiar with how the Copilot chat sample works. So I've been doing it mostly just creating a chat scenario locally and then calling the planner itself. I haven't looked at how intent works in the Copilot chat app, so I could probably take a look at that because that's currently the issue that I'm running into because I would like to be able to ask follow-up questions without having to repeat all the information that I'm currently providing to it. So if that's kind of a way to go about it, I could probably take a look at that.
Start there and then re-ask the question next week.
Okay,
See
thank
if
you.
see if it
Sounds
solves
good.
it. Okay, we have 1 minute left. One last question. So great on time. So Shrishti asks, I want to know how can I create a chatbot where I have to integrate LLM with an API as well in parallel using Semantic Kernel. I think this is where we would point to the Copilot chat sample as well as the notebooks. I agree that our documentation needs to improve. We just had a refresh, I think post build, and we are continuing to refresh the docs as well. So yeah, I don't know if do I have anything more specific to.
I'm
point
wondering
to?
if this is similar to the project, the sample where we use GitHub. We fetch multiple documents from GitHub and we index all of them. I'm trying to think if that could help as a starting point, you know.
Yeah, definitely one of those samples is the best place to go. It gives you what you need to get running. You just bring the keys.
In
Copilot
Copilot
chat
chat is one
it'd be
document, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll let you upload one document at a time, or you can
Yeah.
ingest documents to storage and then chat over them.
Yeah, the GitHub example will download multiple documents and index all of them. So it might be simpler because it doesn't use the planner.
Yep.
So maybe that's a good way to start. Consider they have only 4 weeks.
Yeah, check out those samples and again re-ask the question or Discord or yeah, and we can revisit next time. All right, with that, thank you all for joining. And yes, please continue to give us feedback on GitHub, Discord, wherever, and we'll have office hours again next week. All right. Thank you,
Okay,
everybody.
everyone. Have a good week.